June 24th, 2026, 6:04 p.m. local time. A devastating earthquake struck the northern coast of Venezuela. Just 39 seconds later, before the first earthquake's waves had even left the country, a second and far larger earthquake struck the same location. On the Richter scale, the first measured 7.2, the second 7.5. In less than a minute, a chain of disaster known as a doublet, something even scientists rarely witness, unfolded. So why was the Venezuela earthquake so devastating? The answer isn't just about the earthquake's magnitude, because what happened in Venezuela is an exceedingly rare natural phenomenon, a double earthquake. Let's go back to that evening. On the evening of June 24, 2026, at 6:04 p.m., people in Venezuela were winding down an ordinary day. Heavy traffic filled the capital, Caracas. People had left work and were heading home. Then came the first major tremor, magnitude 7.2, 22 kilometers below the surface. The epicenter was in the Veros area of Yaracuy State, approximately 170 kilometers west of Caracas. In under a minute, another disaster, a doublet that even scientists rarely see, struck. A second earthquake, this time magnitude 7.5. And tragically, this second one was bigger, magnitude 7.5, at a depth of just 10 kilometers. Shallower and far more destructive. The peak ground acceleration was 0.6 hg. What does that mean? The ground's horizontal acceleration was roughly 2/3 of gravity itself. With that kind of force, it was impossible for buildings to remain standing. Two massive tremors struck Venezuela within the same minute, just 39 seconds apart. That's why it's called a doublet earthquake. The quake was so powerful that tremors were felt across the Caribbean and as far as northern Brazil. Coastal uplift of up to 6 meters was recorded along the shores of Trinidad. Earthquakes usually work like this. A large main shock occurs, followed by smaller aftershocks. There can be hundreds, even thousands of aftershocks over a week, but all of them are smaller than the main shock. A doublet earthquake is different. Two earthquakes of similar magnitude occur very close together in time and space. Both are destructive earthquakes in their own right. The closest parallel is the 2023 earthquake in Turkey. As you may recall, earthquakes struck Maraş and Adıyaman in Turkey 8 hours apart, killing more than 50,000 people. And the Turkish government's failed post-earthquake response drew widespread outrage. But in Venezuela, the difference was this. The interval was only 39 seconds. People were still experiencing the first tremor when the second one hit. They had almost no time to escape. Yes, just 39 seconds. That's barely enough time to safely exit a building or assess a damaged structure. And for a city in panic, it's no more than the space of a single breath. Unfortunately, the earthquake never gave Venezuela that breath. At first glance, the fact that the Venezuela earthquakes were magnitude 7+ and of the doublet type seems to be the primary reason for the devastation. But attributing such massive destruction solely to the earthquake being large would be misleading. Yes, 7.2 and 7.5 are very large earthquakes, but not every earthquake of that magnitude around the world produces the same outcome. In some countries, tremors of similar magnitude result in limited loss of life. In others, the destruction is catastrophic, because magnitude alone does not determine an earthquake's destructiveness. We must also consider depth, ground safety, proximity of the fault line to cities, and the quality of building construction. In Venezuela, many of these factors came into play simultaneously. We've looked at the double earthquake aspect. Now let's examine the geological situation. Northern Venezuela is already a geologically high-risk region. It's home to one of the most active plate boundaries on Earth, the Caribbean Plate. The Caribbean Plate slides past the South American Plate, grinding against it by roughly 20 millimeters each year. Yes, 20 millimeters, about as much as a fingernail grows in a week. But the cost of that slow movement is an enormous buildup of energy over centuries. This is called strike-slip faulting. Two pieces of the Earth's crust slide horizontally past one another. The main structure is the Boconó, San Sebastián, El Pilar fault system, a massive right lateral strike-slip fault stretching 1,300 kilometers from the Venezuelan Andes to Trinidad. Just like the San Andreas fault in California. Same mechanism, same type of movement. Even the annual slip rates are similar, 30 millimeters a year for the San Andreas, 20 millimeters a year for San Sebastian. This fault system hadn't seen a disaster of this magnitude since the 1900 San Narciso earthquake. In other words, 126 years of accumulated stress was released on June 24th, in just 39 seconds. The most critical detail here is the submarine segment of this fault. The bulk of the San Sebastian fault runs just off the Venezuelan coast, beneath the seabed. The short onshore segment runs near Simón Bolívar International Airport. On June 24th, the initial rupture began on this onshore segment, then jumped offshore, and that's where the real destruction happened. The result of the double earthquake was catastrophic. According to initial data from Reuters, the death toll reached 3,535. 16,740 were injured. 17,054 were left homeless. At least 15,000 people are staying in temporary shelters around Caracas and La Guaira. After the earthquake, the heaviest damage was in La Guaira and Caracas, in the historic Los Palos Grandes neighborhood. Buildings collapsed floor upon floor. Structures that had not been adequately reinforced after the 1967 earthquake in particular couldn't withstand the second blow. The coastal settlements of La Guaira, with their weak soil, steep slopes, roads, and dense construction, became one of the areas hardest hit by post-earthquake destruction. Years of neglected urban renewal and building reinforcement efforts tragically led to disaster. One of the most critical factors amplifying the destruction in Venezuela was poor construction quality. In countries on earthquake belts, two things save lives: good regulations and strict oversight. But well-written regulations aren't enough. The building must actually be constructed with the right materials, the right calculations, and the right workmanship. Columns must not be cut, concrete must not be weak, rebar must not be skimped on. Old buildings must not be abandoned to their fate. Because when an earthquake strikes, a building doesn't ask, is this country's economy in bad shape? Is this building old? Were inspections conducted in this neighborhood? An earthquake only applies physics. The weak point breaks, the poorly built section collapses, and people pay for that negligence with their lives. And that's why one of the core issues of the Venezuela earthquake was this. Yes, the disaster was massive and violent, but what magnified it were years of accumulated structural, economic, legal, and political vulnerabilities. We've examined the geological dimension and construction quality in Venezuela. But in this country, the real tragedy unfolds above ground. Sitting atop the world's largest proven oil reserves, yet unable to find the cement or steel to renew its building stock, it's an outright tragedy. This is precisely where years of the Maduro regime have brought the country. Under normal circumstances, if you're living on top of a monster like the Caribbean plate, you should channel your oil revenues directly into infrastructure, ground reinforcement, and urban renewal. But in Venezuela, these vast resources have melted away in a crucible of chronic political instability, administrative inefficiency, and unrelenting economic crises. For an earthquake-prone country, the most important line of defense is the building stock. Today, in the capital Caracas and other cities sitting on dangerous fault lines, there's a massive structural vulnerability. In particular, the makeshift shanty towns, built on hillsides, known locally as barrios, have grown entirely unchecked, with no engineering oversight whatsoever. In these areas, concepts like soil surveys or seismic isolation aren't even on the table. And the problem isn't just a lack of budget or materials. It's brain drain. Hyperinflation and instability have decimated the country's skilled workforce. Thousands of civil engineers, seismologists, and architects, the very people who would prepare buildings for earthquakes and design ground reinforcement projects, have long since left the country. Institutional oversight mechanisms have completely collapsed. But in Venezuela, a state structure grappling with daily power outages and basic needs crises has entirely lost sight of budgeting for a future earthquake. In short, Venezuela isn't just under geological threat. The country has been so shaken by its own internal political and economic earthquakes for so long that it has long forgotten to prepare for the real disaster lurking beneath the ground. As the fault lines slowly continue to accumulate energy, the cities sitting on top of them grow more fragile with each passing day. The earthquake didn't just shake buildings, and the disaster didn't end when the shaking stopped. More than 1,000 aftershocks were recorded. And seismologists are warning of something else. The ground is shifted. Mountain slopes have been loosened. When the next rainy season arrives, landslides are inevitable. In some areas, liquefaction risk has emerged. What does this mean? Normally solid-looking, water-saturated soils can lose their bearing capacity during seismic waves. The ground suddenly becomes softer, more mobile, more unsafe. A building is stressed not only by the shaking, but also by the behavior of the soil beneath it. That's why the soil matters just as much as the structure. The same building might perform well on solid bedrock, but suffer far more damage on soft, water-saturated ground. Today in Venezuela, the risk of disease is rising in temporary shelters. The sewage system has collapsed. Relief organizations say they are on the brink of a health crisis. The country is now living through its second crisis, after the earthquake, because surviving a disaster doesn't mean you've escaped it. If your home is destroyed, if there's no clean water, if the sewage system is damaged, if you're living in crowded shelters, the risk of disease begins. This shows us something crucial. An earthquake doesn't only kill in the first minute. Sometimes the second disaster begins after the earthquake ends. Respiratory infections, diarrhea, skin diseases, wound infections, all of these are real dangers in the post-disaster period. According to UNICEF, 1.8 million people in Venezuela are currently in need of humanitarian assistance. 680,000 of them are children. This detail is crucial, because children are one of the most vulnerable groups in disasters. A child doesn't just lose their home after an earthquake. They also lose their school, their sense of safety, and their daily routine. They need clean water, healthcare, safe spaces, and psychological support. That's why the Venezuela earthquake is not just a geological event. It is also a massive humanitarian crisis. The Venezuelan people, who have been struggling with economic and political crises for years, are now facing a bill worth billions of dollars. Even that alone is devastating, because economic loss isn't just the cost of destroyed buildings. When an earthquake strikes a poor or fragile economy, it doesn't just affect today, it shapes years to come. After the Venezuela earthquake, ask yourselves this: when the big one comes, are we ready? Yes, earthquakes are natural events, but the scale of the disaster is often man-made. We can't stop a fault line. We can't halt the movement of tectonic plates. We can't erase the energy that builds up beneath the ground, but we can choose how we build. We can reinforce old structures and make them earthquake resistant. We can create large assembly areas in city centers. We can test and verify our emergency response plans. In Venezuela, there were only 39 seconds between two earthquakes. But the amount of time that truly separates a country from disaster is often not 39 seconds. Sometimes it's 39 years of inspections that never happened. And perhaps the most painful lesson of this disaster is this: earthquakes come without warning. What happened in Venezuela on June 24, 2026 showed once again just how dynamic our planet is. 124 years of accumulated stress on the San Sebastian Fault, released in just 39 seconds, and the El Pilar segment remains silent for 184 years. We can't choose the geology we live in, but we can improve the conditions we have. If you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.